What if I told you the largest country on Earth began?
Centuries ago, few could have imagined that this remote frontier would one day control millions of square miles. The land was harsh, the winters were brutal, and danger could appear from the horizon at any moment. There were no mountains to block invading armies, and no oceans to protect the people who lived here. Only open plains, stretching farther and farther beyond the eye could see, a landscape filled with uncertainty. Every rider in the distance could be a merchant, a traveler, or the beginning of a disaster. For generations, the people of these lands learned to survive in a world that offered few guarantees. One morning, a young prince noticed movement far beyond the settlement and decided to investigate. In this frontier world, every encounter mattered because opportunity and danger often looked the same. As the riders approached, the tension slowly eased. They were merchants, bringing news from distant lands. They spoke of trade, wealth, and powerful cities far beyond the forests of the north. Their stories described a growing world connected by rivers, roads, and commerce. Curious and ambitious, the prince followed their route, traveling southward toward the center of power. After many days, something remarkable appeared, rising above the horizon, larger than anything he had ever seen. This was Kiev, the heart of Kievan Rus, a city whose influence reached far beyond its walls. Here, merchants arrived from Europe, from Asia, and from distant kingdoms across the continent. Wealth flowed through Kiev, along rivers and trade routes, bringing prosperity and growing influence to the city. Magnificent churches rose upward, markets thrived, and many believed the future of Rus was secure. But beneath the prosperity, a dangerous weakness was quietly growing, one that few fully understood. The princes of Rus were divided, competing for power, instead of preparing for future threats. Far beyond the eastern horizon, beyond forests, beyond rivers, a new force was already rising. They emerged from the steppe, a world shaped by hardship, where survival created disciplined and relentless warriors. Few people in Rus had ever heard their name, but soon the entire region would fear them. Their armies moved faster than any enemy before, covering enormous distances with terrifying speed and precision. Before long, the princes of Rus would encounter these warriors for the very first time in history. Confident in their strength, the princes believed they could stop the invaders before the threat grew larger. A coalition was formed, and warriors gathered from different regions, marching eastward toward the unknown. But the Mongols were already preparing, a strategy that had destroyed many enemies before them. The farther the Rus armies advanced, the more vulnerable they became, stretching their lines and losing coordination along the way. Then suddenly, the trap was sprung and the Battle of Kalka River began, with devastating consequences for Rus. Arrows darkened the sky, horsemen appeared from every direction, and within moments, the coalition realized they had been deceived. The Mongols attacked with speed and discipline, striking where the enemy was weakest and most vulnerable. Brave warriors fought back, but courage alone could not overcome a perfectly organized army. One formation after another began to collapse as confusion spread across the battlefield. By the end of the battle, thousands were dead, and the princes of Rus had suffered a devastating defeat. It was a disaster, unlike anything they had experienced before, and it revealed a frightening truth. A new enemy had arrived, one unlike the raiders and invaders of the past, an enemy capable of conquering nations. Yet after their victory, the Mongols disappeared, riding back into the east as mysteriously as they had arrived. The surviving princes watched them leave and hoped the danger had passed. For a brief moment, it seemed as if Rus had been spared from complete destruction. The years passed, cities recovered, trade resumed, and daily life slowly returned. markets became busy again. Church bells echoed across towns and villages, and memories of war began to fade. But far beyond the horizon, events were unfolding that would soon change the destiny of Rus. A new Mongol army was gathering strength, larger, more experienced, and more ambitious. This time they did not come to scout the region or test their enemies. They came to conquer, to destroy resistance, and to bring the lands of Rus under their control. In the winter of 1237, the invasion finally began, and the storm moved westward. The first city to stand in its path was Ryazan, a proud settlement on the frontier. Messengers raced outward, requesting aid, begging neighboring princes for support against the invaders. But help never arrived, and Ryazan found itself standing alone against one of the greatest armies in history. The Mongols surrounded the city, cutting off escape and preparing for a relentless assault. Day after day, the defenders resisted, fighting desperately to protect their homes. But the enemy possessed superior tactics, greater numbers, and endless determination. The walls shook under constant attacks, while fear spread through the city streets. Eventually, the defenses failed, and the invaders poured inside. Fires consumed buildings, families fled, and centuries of life were erased in a matter of days. Ryazan had fallen, and its destruction sent a terrifying message to every city in Rus. The Mongols were not stopping. They were moving forward, and no one knew who would be next. Across the region, fear spread faster than any army or messenger. And with Ryazan destroyed, the road into Rus lay open for the advancing Mongol horde. News of Ryazan's destruction spread across the land, and many realized this was only the beginning. Towns strengthened their defenses, villagers gathered supplies, and rulers prepared for an uncertain future. Yet no preparation could fully protect them from what was coming next. The Mongol army continued forward, moving with astonishing speed through forests, rivers, and frozen plains. Wherever they appeared, fear followed, and resistance was crushed. Soon, their attention turned toward Moscow, a small frontier settlement. At the time, Moscow was far from powerful, and few imagined its future importance. Its wooden defenses offered little protection against an army that had conquered nations. When the attack came, it was swift, violent, and overwhelming. Flames rose above the settlement, homes were destroyed, and Moscow fell to the invaders. Yet the Mongols did not stop there. Their campaign continued westward. One city after another found itself standing before the storm. The next great target was Vladimir, one of the most important cities in the region. Its leaders understood the danger they faced and prepared for a desperate defense. Soon, the city was surrounded by an enemy that seemed unstoppable. The attacks came constantly, day after day, with no chance for relief. The defenders fought bravely, but every passing day brought them closer to defeat. Eventually, the walls were breached and the city was exposed. Fire and destruction swept through Vladimir, just as they had through Ryazan. Another great city had fallen, and the Mongol advance continued. Across Rus, entire communities fled, seeking safety wherever they could find it. Families abandoned homes, crossed frozen rivers, and disappeared into the forests. Fear now ruled the land, and many wondered if any city could survive. Meanwhile, the Mongols moved steadily toward the greatest prize of all. Ahead of them stood Kiev, the heart of Kievan Rus and the symbol of its civilization. For centuries, Kiev had prospered through trade, wealth, and influence. Its churches, its markets, and its rulers were known throughout the region. But now, the city faced the greatest threat in its history. Mongol forces gathered around Kiev, preparing for a siege that would decide everything. And as winter approached, the fate of Kiev and the future of Rus hung in the balance. For generations, Kiev had stood as the heart of Rus, a center of faith, trade, and power. Its walls had protected countless generations, and many believed they would endure forever. But now, the city was surrounded by an enemy unlike any it had faced before. The siege began, and each passing day brought more destruction and less hope. Food became scarce, supplies disappeared, and fear spread through every street. Yet the defenders refused to surrender, determined to protect their city. Then at last the walls gave way, and the invaders poured inside. Fighting erupted everywhere, through churches, markets, and narrow streets. Buildings burned, centuries of history vanished in flames before the eyes of survivors. When the battle ended, Kiev lay devastated, and an entire era had come to an end. The fall of Kiev marked the collapse of Kievan Rus, the most powerful state in the region. But although Rus had been defeated, its people had survived. The Mongols chose not to destroy everything, but instead to rule it. A new political order emerged, known as the Golden Horde. From the vast steppe, its rulers controlled the lands of Rus through fear and tribute. The princes of Rus were forced to travel to the Khan and request permission to govern. Year after year, silver, goods, and wealth flowed southward. An entire generation grew up knowing only Mongol domination. Yet deep within the forests, far from the centers of power, a small settlement continued to survive. That settlement was Moscow, still small, still insignificant. It possessed no great army, no enormous wealth, and no famous monuments. Yet Moscow had something many larger cities lacked: a secure position deep inside the forests. Distance protected it from many dangers and gave it time to recover. As years passed, people searching for safety began moving toward Moscow. The settlement expanded, its population increased, and its influence slowly grew. Moscow's rulers learned how to cooperate with the Golden Horde instead of opposing it. They collected tribute on behalf of the Mongols and gained favor in return. Wealth began to accumulate inside the growing town, while many rivals continued to weaken. One ruler in particular understood how to transform survival into opportunity. His name was Ivan Kalita, and under his leadership, Moscow's rise would truly begin. Under Ivan Kalita, Moscow became richer, while many neighboring cities continued to struggle. Merchants arrived, new homes appeared, and the settlement expanded year after year. Wealth brought influence, and influence attracted even more people to Moscow. Slowly, the balance of power within the lands of Rus began to change. Cities that once dominated now watched as Moscow grew stronger with each passing decade. Moscow's rulers understood that patience could achieve what war often could not. Through diplomacy, trade, and careful planning, their influence expanded. Meanwhile, the Golden Horde was beginning to weaken from within. Rival factions competed for authority, and unity started to disappear. For Moscow, this created an opportunity that previous generations never possessed. By the 15th century, Moscow had become the leading power among the Rus states. More princes looked toward Moscow for leadership and protection. Among its rulers, one man stood apart from all who came before. His name was Ivan III, known today as Ivan the Great. Ivan understood that Moscow could never become truly independent while tribute continued. For generations, the princes of Rus had paid the Horde to maintain peace. But Ivan believed the time had come to challenge the old order. So he made a decision that would change history for centuries to come. Moscow stopped paying tribute to the Golden Horde and openly defied its authority. The response was immediate. The Horde prepared to force Moscow into submission. Once again, armies gathered, and the possibility of war hung over the region. In 1480, the forces of Moscow and the Golden Horde met at the Ugra River. Across the river, two armies stared at one another, waiting. Days passed and no attack came, yet the tension continued to grow. Then weeks passed, and still neither side was willing to move first. Soldiers waited through cold mornings and long nights filled with uncertainty. The Horde expected fear, but Moscow refused to retreat or surrender. Eventually, the impossible happened. The Horde began to withdraw. Without a decisive battle, nearly 2.5 centuries of Mongol domination came to an end. Moscow stood victorious, independent, confident, and ready for the future. Independence changed everything for the first time. Moscow could decide its own destiny. The age of survival was ending, and the age of expansion was beginning. Yet dangers remained beyond Moscow's borders. Hostile states still existed. One ruler believed that security required strength, and strength required expansion. His name was Ivan IV, known to history as Ivan the Terrible. He became the first ruler to officially take the title of Tsar of Russia. Ivan looked east toward the Khanate of Kazan, a longtime rival of Moscow. He understood that as long as Kazan survived, Russia's frontier would remain vulnerable. So Russian armies marched toward Kazan, preparing for one of the most important campaigns in their history. After a long siege, the walls finally fell, and Kazan became part of Russia. The victory transformed the balance of power across the region and opened new possibilities. Soon another target appeared, Astrakhan, controlling the lower Volga. Russian forces advanced again, determined to secure the entire river system. Astrakhan fell, and with it Russia gained control of a vital gateway. Now the Volga belonged to Russia, and the road east lay open. Beyond the Ural Mountains stretched a land few Europeans had ever seen. Endless forests, vast rivers, and unimaginable distances awaited exploration. Among those who ventured east, one man became legendary. His name was Yermak. Leading bands of Cossacks, he crossed the frontier and entered Siberia. His victories opened a path into a region larger than most empires on Earth. But Siberia offered more than land alone. It offered wealth. Valuable furs, often called soft gold, were in enormous demand across Europe. Traders followed explorers, and forts followed traders, pushing the frontier farther east. Rivers became highways through the wilderness, guiding expansion across the continent. Decade after decade, Russian settlements spread deeper into Siberia. Eventually, explorers reached the Pacific Ocean after crossing an entire continent. By now, Russia stretched farther than almost any state in history. Later rulers, including Peter the Great and Catherine the Great, expanded its influence even more. From a vulnerable frontier settlement, Russia had become a vast empire spanning Europe and Asia. Through survival, adaptation, and relentless expansion, Russia became the largest country on Earth. From a small frontier settlement to the largest country on Earth, Russia's journey was shaped by war, endurance, ambition, and opportunity. If you enjoyed this journey through history, please subscribe to the channel and let us know which civilization you would like to explore next. Until then, thank you for watching.